Hello there, Mr. Lee here, and welcome to the Temple of Portunus, also known as the Temple of Fortuna Virilis. Although while we're here, don't just want to talk about this temple behind me, but I also want to talk about the area in general as well, with the Temple of Hercules Victor just behind me now in the shot, and also further along the banks of the river Tiber, where the main road runs parallel to nowadays. I think we should start by considering why we're looking at this particular temple, and the reason is simple. Because it is a simple example of a Roman temple, a typical traditional Roman temple. And the choice is obvious too, because this is the only completely preserved ancient temple now standing in Rome. So here we are by the ports looking at the temple of Portunus, which is a deity. Well, I think the first four letter gives it away, is the deity to harbour life, so presumably trade, ports, and this being such a busy hive of activity in ancient Roman times with transshipment, goods being loaded and unloaded from the Tiber for Rome, this is an obvious location for a temple of Portunus, although some documents just depict it as the temple of Fortuna Virilis. I presume good manly virtues are important for trading. That must be the reason why. Right, let's talk a bit more about the shape of this building. I like to call it a sort of treasure chest shape, although rather than having a rounded lid at the top, it's a triangular lid. If you study Greek temples, it's got a very similar sort of shape, except the way you divide up that rectangular space is a bit different, and you can't go all the way around the platform. If you think of it as a rectangle sort of plan, the first thing you do at the front of the temple is you attach a set of stairs going up to the top level. In some temples, the platform actually extends out and the stairs are actually built into the side, but either way, you have the stairs coming up to the first line of column, and that's a sort of portico area. You might call that the procella. And then beyond that, you've got the actual enclosed space, and that is the cella, taking up 2/3 of that rectangle at the back. Right, sorry, there always seems to be some sort of emergency service running along this busy road. Right, the stairs goes up to the first line of column. If you like, that's the first third of the triangle. It's covered, but there's no wall on either side. You might call that the procella, the area in front of the cella. And I suppose behind that is the cella, taking up the 2/3 of the rectangle, and that's got walls on either side, it's completely sheltered, and that's where the religious activity takes place. So stairs, procella, and cella. In this particular building, Temple of Portunus, there are 7 columns along the side and 4 columns on the front. So 7, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 columns all the way around the outside. 6 of those columns are completely freestanding at the front, but the other 12, is it 12? The other 12 columns are what we call semi-engaged. What that means is part of it is on the wall of the cella, but they sort of build out a column on the wall of the cella just to make it look neat, I guess. That's what it means by a semi-engaged column. Right, just ignore what I said earlier on about the procella. Actually, it's probably best to go with the portico or the pronaos area, even for a Roman temple. And that's the bit between the steps as you come up and the cella, which is the enclosed space within the temple. All this sits on top of the platform, which is known as the podium, and the columns on the portico area are freestanding columns, whereas the columns around the enclosed areas are semi-engaged, no matter how engaged they are with the walls of the enclosed cella. I forgot to mention the altar.
The altar would sit in front of the steps of the temple, so somewhere around the area where I've marked it. I don't know exactly how far away from the steps it is, but it'll be just in front of the temple, and that's where sacrifices and other religious activity really would take place. They wouldn't really take place in the Keller.
Now, a lot of these buildings are preserved so that we get to enjoy it nowadays because they were converted into churches. And that brings me to say that actually the Romans borrowed this form of temple from a group of people who lived in the area before them. And these groups are called the Etruscans. This form, this type of temple is typically called a sort of Etruscan style temple, although, it's pretty standard for the Romans by now. What we will see later on in this video is the temple to Hercules, Victor, which isn't in this typical form. But the reason why you study this as part of the course is because this example of Temple of Portunus is the typical form of a Roman temple. Now we're at quite a busy part of Rome here, and the busyness of the traffic, we've got main roads either side of the Temple of Portunus, makes it quite difficult sometimes for me to speak to you and for you to hear me. But this is important in terms of the location. First thing to say, just to tell you before I forget, is that the temple is on a platform, or rather there's like the ground level where the grass is, can't really point very well, and then just above that they build up into a platform, and then from there they start building the columns and things. So do bear that in mind. These buildings are elevated, and that's why there needs to be a set of stairs going up to it. Right, on the next few shots I hope to give you an idea of where exactly this building is, to show you why this area was such a hive of activity and, well, still is now. From this shot, you can just see the Temple of Hercules Victor right in front of you in that round shape, and just a little bit hidden to the right is the Temple of Portunus, just over that little tower of that church there. So, on where they sit is called the Forum Boarium, and is on the exit end of a meander of the river Tiber as it turns to flow southwest. It's a little bit of flats land which is ideal for the transfer of goods on and off the river into the city, out of the city. And if you have a look at where the Theatre of Marcellus is and the Capitoline Hill is, just bear those things in mind, because on the next bit of the video you'd see a shot where you pan down from the Capitoline to the Forum Boarium, and you can see there's a natural valley which is ideal for the transfer, for the movement of goods. Here, in the zoomed out plan of the whole of the ancient Rome in the imperial times, you can see there's two natural routes that you could take from the old fora or the built-up part of Rome into that port area, making a good place for a market as well as unloading and loading of goods. Right, just over the stairs behind me is the river Tiber, and actually the river Tiber is not at the level of the top of the embankment, so I presume the embankment was built at some point to make sure that flooding doesn't affect the area. That's my guess. But the Temple of Portunus is part of an area called the Forum Boarium, the cattle markets, if you like, and this is where, well, not just cattle really, but a lot of things were traded. The river being right next to it, ships would have come up from the sea-going ports of Ostia and Portus at the mouth of the river Tiber up to here where they're unloaded. That's necessary because sea-going ships are bigger and river-going ships are smaller. Some of those river-going ships, river trade ships, would have come downriver from higher up in the hills and mountains up along as well. So this is an area full of commercial activity. And so Portunus would have been a god that would look after the harbour trade and make sure all things go well. There's a bit of mythological context to the area as well. The reason why this area might be called Forum Boarium, and we don't know if the myth came first or the trading of cattle came first. I suspect the trading of cattle did. Was that here was the area where allegedly Hercules, having gotten Hesperius's cattle, came to rest in this little flat land just by the Tiber. He must have come down along the coast or down along the course of the river Tiber, not entirely sure. And whilst here, a giant called Cacus came to try and steal the cattle that he stolen, I guess. And so Hercules achieved something amazing by recapturing the cattle from this foul monster, and so achieved not one of the official labours, but achieved something that's quite Herculean, quite heroic here in Rome, giving Rome a bit of stardust. And that story is depicted in the Aeneid as a explanation story of why there was a festival to Hercules, which I presume would have been based around here. And just behind me, this round temple is the temple of Hercules Victor. I presume the idea of him as a victor must have been from that battle with the giants that he has fought. This temple is not of the ordinary shape that you saw in the temple of Portunus. This temple is completely round and with columns on the outside. The most famous example of this sort of temple being the temple to the Festal Virgins, just by the Roman Forum, at the heart of the Roman Forum there. This type of temple is called a solos. It was built here. Not sure why they chose that shape. I'm sure someone can tell me the answer. And it was built and sponsored by people who traded in oil, actually. So I presume other than cattle, oil must have been traded here. Do you make oil from animal fat? Not sure. In any case, a hive of activity going on here and a hive of stories associated with it. Compared to all that goes on in the past, it seems remarkably calm here today. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it useful, and let me know if you do, and see you next time.